that lipid nanoparticle, as we said, but we've seen that in Gardasil and some of the newer hepatitis B vaccines. We've seen similar of those lipid nanoparticles. So we've got an idea how to break those down. But when the RNA, as Stephanie said, is not the RNA of a natural virus, they remove cleavage sites, so it breaks down. And then you've got RNA is a danger signal expressing those GC-rich areas can look like patterns of bacteria and virus at the same time. So we use poly-IC to signal the cell to turn on the type 1 interferon pathway. And because this is an unnatural synthetic envelope and you're not seeing poly-IC, you're not getting the type 1 interferon pathway, that you've bypassed the plasmacytoid dendritic cell, which combined with IL-10 talking to the regulatory B cells decides what subclasses of antibodies to put out. So you've bypassed the communication between the innate and adaptive immune response. So you've missed the signaling of the endocannabinoid receptors with those lipid nanoparticles. Being 30 to 50 nanomolars is about half to a third the size of the natural viral particle. And this is how we always determine the difference between exosomes and viruses, because viruses are about 100 nanomolar. You still can't filter them away from it easily. And as you mentioned, those.
Is it nanometers, not nanomolar?
Nanometers. Yeah, nanometers. So the size of the virus is like 1/3 of the normal virus. So this is how on an electron micrograph we distinguish exosomes, extracellular vectors, vesicles. It's not that they're not there in the diseases, and interestingly, they carry these defective messages. That one of a large part of Dr. Rossetti and my work over the last 30 years to say you don't need an infectious transmissible virus. These defective viruses all the way through HIV and everything we're seeing, just pieces and parts of these viruses are worse, as Stephanie's saying, because they also turn on danger signals. They act like danger signals and pathogen-associated molecular patterns. So it synergistically just leaves that inflammatory cytokine signature on that spins out of control your innate immune response. It just cannot keep up with the myelopoiesis. So you see a skew away from the mesenchymal stem cell towards a TGF-beta regulated hematopoietic stem cells. So you could see the bleeding disorders on both ends. You can't make enough fire trucks to send to the fire, whether it be eosinophils, all your innate immune response, can't get there. Macrophage, monocyte, subsets, so can't do it. And then you've just got a total train wreck of your immune system.
Yeah. This makes so much sense. And in fact, I'm really excited to hear Judy talk about some of this stuff, because I was just reading over the weekend about this interferon, type 1 interferon, which I think is actually very, very interesting with respect to these vaccines, because we're seeing several different kinds of evidence of herpes and varicella infection, shingles, people getting shingles right after the vaccine, or getting a herpes, or getting a cold sore, a herpes in flare up. So basically you've got these latent viruses that are not bothering you at all until your immune system gets completely distracted by this crazy thing going on in the spleen with all this messenger RNA and all these spike proteins. The immune cells are distracted from their other job of keeping these viruses in check. And so you get these other conditions showing up, and there's several. There's facial palsy, for example, Bell's palsy. There's like over 1,200 cases of Bell's palsy reported after the vaccine in the vaccine adverse event reporting system. And Bell's palsy, when you look at the research of what causes that, they really point to the herpes virus and the varicella virus as being the source of Bell's palsy. So what you're seeing, I think, is a suppression of that. And I'd like to hear Judy's take on that. In type 1 interferon system is what you need to keep these guys in check. And so those viruses are getting enabled, and they're causing symptoms. And then that is actually a very bad sign. I've looked over the weekend, I looked at a lot of data to see that if a woman who's pregnant has a herpes flare-up during pregnancy, she has a twofold increased risk of producing an autistic son. And also people who have Parkinson's disease. They had a study on 200 Parkinson's patients compared to 200 age-matched, gender-matched controls. 6 of those Parkinson's patients had at least one episode of Bell's palsy in the past, whereas none of the controls had. So it looks to me like the Bell's palsy is an indicator of a future risk of Parkinson's disease. And if you get herpes flare-up in pregnancy, and of course they've done experiments with mice, they know they can cause the offspring of a pregnant mouse to become autistic just by giving immune flare-up. It's a well-known way to produce autism in the offspring is to have an acute immune response by the mother mouse during pregnancy. So I think we're asking these pregnant women to go get this vaccine. Not only are they have the potential to abort the baby, potentially not be able to have another child after that is a real possibility, I think. And or to end up with a child with autism or maybe some other kinds of problems because of that intense immune flare-up during pregnancy, which is a very dangerous thing for the baby, I think.
Yeah. So there's not much better person to address this than Judy, because this is interferon, as I understand from reading her most recent book, is the catalyst for her going into science. When she saw it discussed in the front cover of Time magazine, and she addressed a big portion of her initial scientific career studying it. So why didn't you take it from here, Judy?
Yeah, exactly. Type 1 interferon, and it's interesting because we're always talking about type 1 versus type 2 responses. And unfortunately, in the field, the language that the clinicians call type 1 and type 2 a very different thing than the research immunologist people, because, of course, type 1 is not the innate immune interferon. Type 1 responses are adaptive, and they're the gamma interferon. So the innate immune interferon is your whole front line. And we know from, my work, my initial work, remember AIDS patients, people who got AIDS from HIV had a dysregulated type 1, so they couldn't make gamma interferon. Rather, it was skewed towards Th2, IL-4, IL-5, towards, parasites, worms, helminths. That's a type 2 response. And isn't it curious that we have that ivermectin and antiparasitics work. And there's a paper that I use, and I probably have used it, Dr. Mercola, in all of our talks. And I know Stephanie and I usually put it on the screen. And it has to do directly with what she's saying, again, about another family of viruses, the herpes viruses. And the paper is called War and Peace Among the Microbes. Mm-hmm. So what we always saw in AIDS patients, and this was the age-old argument of, is it herpes viruses causing AIDS, HHV6 causing ME/CFS, that were long associated, and it's not until the virus families partner up. The retroviruses take out the type 1 interferon pathway, as does Borrelia, as they dysregulate the plasmacytoid dendritic cell. Then the HIV sequences do most of their damage to the monocyte macrophage, whereas Stephanie just said it's kept latent. So she mentioned GC-rich regions in the sequences. Those regulate DNA methylation pathways, which then silence the virus. So, at multiple levels, you cut out your frontline troops, you direct the responses, as Stephanie said in the beginning, directly to the spleen, send everybody to the spleen for the explosion, but you bypassed the mucosal surfaces and the resident stem cell monocyte macrophage. So every single tissue, like alveolar macrophages in the lung, Kupffer cells in the liver. That was my PhD thesis, is if you kept the viruses latent, then they don't stimulate those cascades, which can be organ system specific. And this is what we saw caused AIDS. HIV did not cause AIDS. You needed more than one pathogen to take out natural killer cells in the case of Borrelia. And then you think about mycotoxins and the parts. So you're damaging, you're synergizing the ability to dysregulate the innate and the adaptive. And then you dysregulate the activation of your endogenous viruses, your endogenous syncytin. Then your gamma retrovirus envelope is expressed. You're seeing synthetic or non-self or in the back. And then again, you're seeing the sequences from activating the latent viruses like herpes viruses, which are also in part regulated by DNA methylation. So they tether to the inside against the nuclear membrane. So you've got herpes virus co-infected cells with HIV or retrovirus, because you've got your GP120 sequences on the spike protein in these sequences, and you've got the XMRV gamma retrovirus sequences, which are syncytin. So syncytin's like Velcro. So anywhere syncytin is around, you're sticking cells together. So that causes inflammatory responses. You break down, I'll go to the megakaryocytes. See, so you break down your platelet responses. It's just an explosion of a nightmare of crippling every area of your immune response.
Yeah. So just to backtrack a bit, for those who may have not watched your earlier interviews where we were discussed this, but the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein that we're talking about very clearly now has been shown to be engineered. This is not something that's spontaneously mutated, and it's evidenced by the fact that you have this HIV protein integrated into that. So can you confirm that and go on and give more details on it? And did you also say the XMRV protein is integrated in that? So
yeah, because the gamma retrovirus, our endogenous gamma retrovirus is called HERV-W, and HERV-W is all the way back in Genesis in our original endogenous genome. So HERV-W expresses only human endogenous retrovirus. W is a gamma retrovirus that expresses only the envelope. That envelope protein is called syncytin because in retrovirus envelopes, the envelope alone is enough to cause the disease. They're calling it the spike protein just to throw us all off. And as we know, if you culture it using the Bereg-Shai-Zhang Li no-seum method, what did we do? We introduced the mutation into an infectious molecular clone. We grew it in a cell line, Vero E6 monkey tissues that have SIV and other gamma retroviruses, because those are the cell lines we've been using in Fort Detrick and Wuhan since the mid-90s, mixed with a lot of back tissues. So when you introduce a faster growing strain and virus into the cell line, it's called no-seum, because as it replicates really fast without editing functions, the virus can't go back and fix the mistakes like our DNA polymerase does. So it goes right through, it makes mistakes, and you have a recombinant in every fermentation process. So the spike proteins, then in a method you can't detect, you're going to change the expression of the protein. So syncytin is the gamma retrovirus. It cross-reacts with the mouse and monkey gamma retroviruses. Monkeys, mice all have syncytin. And then so your endogenous virus is expressed, especially during hormonal cycles. And when it's expressed in the wrong place, like in the brain and the spinal cord, it's long been associated with the inflammatory disease and the destruction of the myelin sheath in multiple sclerosis. So syncytin expressed in the wrong place gives you the multiple sclerosis diseases, the paralytics diseases. We know, as Stephanie just said, Parkinson's associated with type 1 interferon responses. Joe Cummins, Ken Tech and Lively wrote a book with Joe Cummins about type 1 interferon. We've dug into it a lot more in Ending Plague, our last book, hopefully our last book. Because we're now starting to appreciate really that there's a low level expression of our endogenous virome all the time. And that in our innate immune response, it's trying to shape and educate our type 1 interferon pathways. And there are alpha, beta, 1, 2, 3. There's a lot of type 1 interferons that really fine tune the innate immune response to keep the flame. I say the dimmer switch on inflammation is now inflammation's at the heart of all of these diseases. So it's absolutely fascinating. And the final problem that is the biggest problem is these exosomes, because as we've mentioned, the synthetic, your body's exosomes are like fire, your cell's response to express its regulatory RNAs, small inhibitory RNAs, long chain non-coding RNAs, which Richie Shoemaker has long associated with people with chronic Lyme, ME/CFS, and the TGF-beta-1 pathway. Remember, I just said TGF-beta-1 is, that's the master switch to turn on which type 1, which myelopoiesis. We see cancers younger and younger, accelerated, so it's just accelerated death. But these exosomes are packaging not only RNA that you're making, but now you've dysregulated the methylation machinery. So you've woken up your endogenous virome and all that. And then those RNAs like syncytin are going to be expressed. And that's why we're seeing older and older women, saying, oh, well, there's menstrual cycles. And remember, in ME/CFS, you saw the problems magnified at puberty and menopause. So when those hormones change and you've crippled your liver Kupffer cells, or they have to manufacture, they lose latency of the viruses, and just continue to totally disrupt the type 1 interferon pathway. So it's actually diabolical and sinister, as we appreciate, going back to our friend Tony Fauci, what did he do? Yeah, no, I don't think he's anybody's friend. But it doesn't really matter to me. If he knew how little we thought of him now. Anyway, so at any rate, so we're interested. These problems are fascinating. What Tony Fauci did when he said, XMRVs, gamma retroviruses, have nothing to do with ME/CFS. What we knew was the envelope protein. The envelope protein alone caused disease. So all you had to do was express your endogenous. So when I was locked out of the lab, all the data removed and all the clear evidence, what did everybody say I fabricated at the meeting September 26, 2011? The figure that had to do with use 5-azacitidine, decitabine, a drug we use in cancer to terminally differentiate tumor cells and restore the balance. Oh, why? Because we restored the methylation machinery. We restored everything. So every avenue of what we found in HIV/AIDS, the pathways of synergies, and what we found in disease. So Tony Fauci said, it's an endogenous virus. It's as if your endogenous virome forgets how to be expressed. No, God gave us that delicate communication orchestration of these immune responses for better. So he sends ME/CFS and chronic Lyme disease and autism clearly associated with dysregulation of type 1 interferon. Why did Ampligen work? What was Ampligen? Poly-I to stimulate that pathway.
There's so much we can talk about, and we are going to discuss this further in our next interview on your upcoming book, Ending Plague. But I want to stick and focus on the COVID-19 vaccine first. And one of the reasons I wanted you on was that Stephanie had discovered or learned exactly how this virus, how the spike protein messenger RNA can actually be converted through the reverse transcriptase enzyme embedded in our DNA and converted to DNA and then integrated into the genome. So, and this is something you're very familiar with. You've been working on this type of research for decades. So I really wanted you to share your insights on it specifically.
That is that pathway. So when your genome is waking up, when you activate latent and defective viruses, you turn on reverse transcriptase.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Turn on the viral. This is the whole point that, you're going to. So how are retroviruses silenced? DNA methylation. You've thrown in a lot of GC rich regions. You've got that synthetic viral particle. You've woken up your herpes viruses, they're silenced DNA methylation. As you know, our soil is depleted in minerals, where S-adenosyl methionine. We have people with all of these methylation defects. So you've got all of the viruses activated, latent and other. You have recombinant events, and you basically destroyed. This is why I said the first people who are going to die are people with inflammatory conditions. Those 32 people. I've even shown you that slide from the very beginning, and Stephanie knows we've been showing that slide in Autism One. This is how, Dr. Klinghardt and others, this is why Jeff Bradstreet, using GC-MAVs, who's going to die first? The people with the cancers from the vaccine injuries, as the vaccines have been contaminated with animal gamma retroviruses for years. So those people are the ones most likely to sustain the quick injury, because they already have at the heart all the way back. Jonathan Kerr, the first things I did in 2006 is get that type 1 interferon pathway on, and restore DNA methylation. So dimethylglycine right now as a supplement along with glutathione, because you've got to keep the flame turned down so that the pathway doesn't get further. So everything about this vaccine goes back. This is why people with HIV-1 infections, this is why people with diseases that look like that inflammatory signature of disease, multiple sclerosis, anybody with these genetic pathways epigenetically dysregulated by the toxins. That's why aluminum, everything we know in vaccine injury is translatable to this problem, and we can fix it. So yes, it's a problem, but you, Joe, Stephanie, we've been addressing this problem for, at least in my life, the last 15 years. So the solutions make sense. They're the same solutions: ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, low dose antiretroviral therapy, whether natural product or otherwise. So we can educate our immune systems. Type 1 interferon, peptide Ts, cannabis, all those things we've been talking about for the last 3 years. We predicted the problem. And now that the problem is, yes, it's far worse than we expected, but I don't see gloom and doom. I see an opportunity, but we have to make it evident that we appreciate the mechanisms.
Well, I want to understand this at a deeper level too, because we were giving these messenger RNA vaccines, and in a moment, I want you to give your impression of how the Johnson & Johnson adenovirus vaccine differs from that. But it's essentially, we're giving this messenger RNA, which is being converted back to DNA and integrated into the genome. So essentially, these people who are immunized are essentially producing these spike proteins, these genetically altered spike proteins on a regular basis, in many cases for the rest of their lives. So, what you mentioned about the GC-rich residues activating the latent viruses, when these viruses are activated, do these sequences also get integrated in our genome?
They can. But it depends on the defective levels, and you need an integrase gene along the same time. So the answer is yes. And even if a portion gets in, but you won't integrate in the genome because the sequences won't be expressed unless a cell is dividing. So when you're at homeostasis in your immune system, so the people at most risk are people with cancer or with inflammatory diseases, because by definition, cells are dividing. As Stephanie said in the beginning, when you start to see wounds and skin lesions and things where it's clear a herpetic infection's going on, what you have to do is restore the balance to the playing field. Go use a combination of drugs to enhance methylation, like dimethylglycine. That's not even a drug, that's a nutrient. You can use dimethylglycine, betaine.
I'm assuming trimethylglycine would work too.
Both, yes.
That's betaine, right? I think that is trimethylglycine.
Yeah, betaine is dimethylglycine. Betaine is trimethylglycine.
Oh, betaine and betaine. Oh, that's cute. It's interesting that it's glycine too, because I have a feeling that relates to glyphosate.
Correct, because you're crippling your further. And so I've been encouraging, and we've been looking at, keep the playing field level. All of the viruses are activating, and this is what we've known. We've always seen the bigger problem is the extracellular vesicles packaging all that RNA, because the only time under electron microscopes where you can, and this is always the argument of Kaufman and others that say, oh, it's just the extracellular vesicles and there aren't viruses. No, the extracellular vesicles are there, but they can package defective viruses. They can pick up all that RNA because that's their job. The macrophages are going to take that and then drive it into, and then the cells are going to send the fire truck to the fire. So we never see a disease like, let's just say, autism, CFS, AIDS, everything we saw, under the electron microscope, you see 10 times more exosomes in these patients, even if you don't find any virus at all. And so the virus and the signaling pathways are totally dysregulated. So it is, those people have to be protected because they already have membrane problems. Cholesterol diseases, then you're going to crank up and further dysregulate ACE2 receptors in those angiotensin. So I see the problem almost worse with the synthetic lipid nanoparticles.
Sure. All right, Stephanie, give you a chance to respond because
this is all very fascinating.
So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I want to say that I told Judy some time ago that I was really, really determined to try to get her stuff and my stuff to merge. And I think we're a lot closer to that now than we were a year ago. I hope Judy agrees with that. But it's, I got really hung up on this prion angle towards the end of our paper. We wrote the paper. We knew about some hints about spike protein being a prion. And at the time, we decided maybe it's too immature. We'll leave it out of the paper. And then one of our reviewers, luckily, said, you need to cover this. And so we went back to the drawing board and looked deeper. And I think we dug out a gold mine. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying to me. And I'm now thinking that may be the worst aspect of these messenger RNA vaccines, because they're producing this abnormal spike protein that doesn't want to go into the membrane. Prion proteins are known to be typically membrane proteins. They're in the membrane. And when they misfold and become, they're alpha helices in the membrane, and then they misfold and become beta sheets in the cytoplasm. And that's what leads to the prion problem, that they form like a crystal that draws in other proteins and makes this big mess of these and builds these fibrils and whatnot that are things like Alzheimer's plaque. And, the main prion protein is PRP, which is in Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is the human form of mad cow. And we had all that mad cow stuff going on with the cows in the UK. Everyone knows about that. It's a sort of proton source infection. It's quite wild because there's no DNA involved, no RNA involved, just protein. But the thing is, when you have produced a version of messenger RNA that knows how to spew out tons of a prion protein, the prion proteins become problematic when there's too many of them and the concentration is too high in the cytoplasm. And these spike proteins that these messenger RNA vaccines are producing, first of all, they're producing many because they've manipulated the RNA to make it better able to make protein. And they're making this version that isn't able to go into the membrane, which I think is going to encourage it to become even more likely to become a problematic prion protein. And then when you have inflammation, it upregulates alpha-synuclein, which is a prion protein. So you're going to get alpha-synuclein drawn into misfolded spike proteins into a mess inside these dendritic cells in these germinal centers in the spleen. And then this stuff they're going to package up all this crud into these exosomes and release them. And they're going to travel along the vagus nerve to the brainstem and cause things like Parkinson's disease. So there's actually a very well-known story around Parkinson's disease. That's exactly that. It starts in the spleen, and people can have the alpha-synuclein misfolded in the spleen long before they have evidence of Parkinson's disease. Eventually, it makes its way to the brain, and it goes there along the vagus nerve. All of this has been shown in multiple papers that talk about Parkinson's disease. So I think this is a complete setup for Parkinson's disease. And what may happen is that, because they got this vaccine, they get Parkinson's disease 5 years earlier than they would have gotten it otherwise, is basically what I'm thinking is going to push forward the date at which someone who has a propensity towards Parkinson's is going to get it. And it's probably going to cause people to get Parkinson's who never would have gotten it in the first place because of this vaccine. And especially if they keep getting the vaccine every year is what it's looking like now. Every year you do a booster, you get yourself one step, you bring that date that you're going to get Parkinson's ever closer to the present every time you get one of those vaccines. So that's what I'm guessing from this, just very, very logical. And it really matches incredibly well with the Parkinson's story that's well known.
Okay, so that's good.
And it's
good
exactly
so let me go back to the just to tie up the loose ends on these vaccines. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is adenovirus. It's not specifically a messenger RNA vaccine. So Judy, can you share, some people believe it's more dangerous, and I wonder what your views on it, maybe explain the differences between the two vaccines.
Well, as you've just mentioned, it's an adenovirus vector expressing the protein. Mm-hmm. So you're already expressing the HIV and the XMRV envelope and the syncytin, the HERV envelope and the ACE2. So you're already expressing those in the vector. So that's a classic gene therapy vector. As far as, and it goes through a couple of rounds of replication. So with respect to the previous conversation and the RNA component, it's less dangerous because you're not going to see much of the mechanisms we've been talking about the last few minutes with respect to the RNA vaccines. Mm-hmm. And those pathways. But with respect to the fact that these vaccines, these adenovirus vector protein producing things are grown in the aborted fetal tissue cell line, PER. So now you've got human syncytin. Yeah, you've got that entire 8% of the human genome of another human. So now that, again, looking at the endogenous, the communication that has to regulate your type 1 interferon response is going to give you, I look at it like autoimmunity. Here you go, attack, all different things. So you've still spun it out of control, but it expresses for a number of rounds. So in immune compromised people, it's going to continue to express. It's not going to be, and that will give you a live infection, and you're already have your fire trucks over fighting another, so you can't fight a war on three fronts. So that I always say that when you only need one shot because it's the most toxic. So it's the most toxic in that we have so many mechanisms to degrade the RNA, and we can restore methylation machinery. We have things to go on, very difficult. And many of my friends who worked in the gene therapy space died of multiple different kinds of cancers. This was in our old book, Plague of Corruption, our former, I guess it's not old, it's only a year old, but that we're seeing this space in the story we're writing now. And Stephanie knows, we've interviewed at great length of that chapter. So we've been looking at the different scientists and all that we saw in vaccine injury court, in who got sickest and why. So I really believe we can protect people, and it's a nightmare, but I believe our immune system can break it down, and I believe that we have the technologies to turn it around, see who's most susceptible, and protect them. And that's why this is politics and not science.
Yeah, when we're to finish with what we can do to address this and provide safety for those who've been immunized and those who choose not to. But I'm still seeking to understand some elements of the vaccine program. So there's a concern about this viral shedding. Although it's called viral shedding, it can't be a viral shedding because there's less with respect to the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca vaccine.
Transmission, yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. Johnson & Johnson will shed. Johnson & Johnson will shed, and the RNA vaccines, it's considered transmission.
So it's not technically shedding with the Moderna and the Pfizer, because
it's not shit. That's a virus term.
Yeah, so you're giving the shedding is actually the spike proteins, and the spike proteins can be toxic in themselves, but they can't replicate and multiply like a virus.
The transmission is the exosomes and exactly what you just said. Replicate, multiplying virus. Yeah, they don't do that. But again, if your exosome looks like your immune system to a virus, if that synthetic nanoparticle is a virus-like particle, and they're literally self-assembling cages, you've got your synthetic nightmare.
Yeah. So again, which vaccine do you think is the more dangerous? The adenovirus vectored ones or the messenger RNA?
As usual, I think, I'm getting to be quite the politician. It depends. It depends on the on the person.
That's a good answer. Yeah, that's a good answer.
It depends on the person you're giving it to. I think to those with chronic Lyme disease, to those with any inflammatory disease associated with an abnormal host immune response, to like whether it be you pop shingles viruses, you're that population cancer. For those people, the most dangerous is the J&J and the AstraZeneca. They're the people getting the most. Women who get Gardasil because they already have a problem with that synthetic lipid nanoparticle and Gardasil. Those are the people we are seeing get the Parkinsonian shakes and those Huntington-like diseases that we've seen. And as we saw on the high wire a few weeks ago, what is the government doing? Oh, conversion disorder. All of a sudden, you're crazy again. You have a conversion disorder. Well, they did that to those 3 nurses. And this is what we see. This is the value really of that. So I think different components, but the most dangerous to the population of those with existing inflammatory diseases, those were the most susceptible to COVID. For those, it's J&J, kill them quick. You only need 1 shot.
One thing I wonder is whether the children will be more susceptible to the vaccine just because they have had so many other vaccines in their lifetime, because we give so many vaccines to children these days. And all those retroviruses, whether that's going to cause them to be more likely, for example, to convert the RNA vaccines into DNA and end up with a permanent problem. I don't know if you can comment on that.
Yeah, and this is especially important because Fauci a few weeks ago stated that his target is to have this vaccine approved for 6 months old.
It's terrifying to me. Very, very, very disturbing.
It's disturbing in light of the fact that there's virtually at no risk.
I know.
Children are not dying from this disease.
It's really, it's just unbelievable. I don't understand how they can be doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. The most dangerous to the children are the RNA vaccines, because think about the whole last 45 minutes of conversation. Their whole focus, their immune system is growing. You turn on a fire, what happens? All the mesenchymal stem cells that are important for growing. You've got a OPG, and and NF-kappa B, it's called RANKL, receptor of activated NF-kappa B ligand. And that says, okay, all's calm in the immune system. Go build bone, go build higher brain cells, go do the pruning with the macrophages. You can't have your macrophages clearing all the viruses. So yes, the RNA viral vaccines, and you will see those integrations. Yes, reverse transcriptase is on. It's expressed in telomeres. You're growing. That's the whole idea of everything. All the brakes are off. Same thing in pregnancy. That's why I don't do anything in pregnancy, because you've got to stay unmethylated in order to respond to your environment. That endogenous genome of the virome, that's your type 1 interferon responses. So we've messed everything up from the beginning. The balance of the Th2, you won't make Th9, 22 follicular, the follicular stem cells, mom suppressed, totally on with TGF beta. Totally on, not to. So you don't want myelopoiesis. You want embryonic development. We're going to see the kinds of things like Down syndrome that we saw with vaccine injury. Why would you have more Rett syndrome? That's a DNA methylation in little girls who aren't appropriate. So for the kids, the worst thing in the world is the RNA vaccines.
All right. So I would definitely like your insights and as to the projections of the danger and the damage that's going to be result from this vaccine. We've already seen close to 5,000 deaths in the VAERS database. We know clearly that the VAERS database is underreporting by anywhere from 99 to 90%, which means that 5,000 is 50,000 to 500,000 already 6 months into this mess of starting the vaccine program. So my guess is they will kill more than died from COVID, truly died from COVID. And then secondarily, probably more than the Germans killed in World War II. And so there's how many deaths? And the second part of the question is that the biggest cause, or are we really going to potentially decimate the population by its impact on fertility rates? So, I mean, we are below replacement numbers at this point in the United States. The only thing that's holding it up is immigration. So what are your comments on that? Judy, you can start first.
Well, yes, I think the worst thing is, it's a combination of everything. So you're going to see the sterility. We already saw it starting in Gardasil in those who had injury from Gardasil. We knew those mechanisms. So now you've got to consider the kids have this as well, 12 to 15-year-olds now. That critical part of doing this in puberty is going to cause more damage. So where is your immune system susceptible in time? So I think it's the synergy of everything that's diabolical. And I've accelerated cancers, death. I think we already see, again, through that we're seeing AML, acute myelogenous leukemia. That's a disease of 80-year-olds. We had one case of that in vaccine court, in a 15-year-old girl. So younger and younger cancers. Our 41-year-old daughter-in-law, colon cancer, all kinds of cancers. Liver tumors, pancreatic, neuroendocrine tumors, accelerated Parkinson's like diseases, Huntington's.
And these will never be connected to the vaccine. Never.
Right. That's the sad part.
Yeah, they'll dispute it and they say it's just a coincidence.
Yeah, that's happened through the 5 years we've experienced vaccine court, but that's why this has to end forever, and that National Vaccine Injury Compensation Act be repealed completely and liability restored. This never happens again.
Which lifetime is that going to be in?
I'm an optimist.
All right. So Stephanie,
I wouldn't do this if I didn't believe.
Stephanie, what's your projections on this?
It's similar. I mean, I think we're going to see an increase in all these autoimmune and neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, that's Lou Gehrig's disease. And then all these autoimmune disease, rheumatoid arthritis, and celiac disease, and Hashimoto's thyroiditis, because this spike protein has pieces of it that are similar, molecularly similar to many different human proteins that are associated with all these autoimmune diseases. So those antibodies, they're really making you make antibodies to the spike, and those antibodies are going to be dangerous to cause autoimmune disease. And then you're going to have the spike protein itself causing damage to the brain through this mechanism I mentioned. And so I think we're going to have, and then of course cancer comes along as well. So you've got all these awful diseases going up in prevalence. So people will be more, crippled, and they won't be able to think. I mean, all these different long-term suffering kinds of living, but not sure it's worth living kind of situation. Many people are just going to be sick for a long time before they die prematurely.
I think it won't be sick for a long time. So we have evidence in the HTLV1 associated myelopathies that these things go from long latency periods to, in HTLV1, you can get that disease that looked like multiple sclerosis that would have you in wheelchair in 10 years will have you in a wheelchair in 6 months. So all these other toxins combined hitting you, now it's not going to be the live and suffer forever. It's going to be, suffer, like as my mom did, 5 years and die. And she was solid as a rock when they gave her the Prevnar. And then you bleed them out with Eliquis. So you have to think about, we created AFib. And so, your heart's beat. So you're at higher risk of stroke. And then they throw that in and they bleed you out with congestive heart failure. It's similar to in COVID, you throw a mask on it and you get two, and you can accelerate because you've crippled the immune system even further. So I think it's all accelerated. So yes, all the people that already have,
they killed your mother from Prevnar vaccine?
Prevnar and flu shot on the same day. It was right after I got out of jail, and she didn't want to bother me, so they bullied her into it. And then she died in 19. She got a horrible paralysis, 6 months she was sick from that shot, and nobody told me because, as she said, I had enough trouble there. So this is the kind of damage, these iatrogenic. And of course, we've seen this, it's just accelerated. Every one of us have experienced that in our families and our patient population with this 30-year plague of corruption with respects to AIDS. It's just, hey, wait a minute, you don't have to die with an HIV infection. We knew that 6% of the country's asymptomatic for the XMRVs, for the gamma retroviruses, and all the other garbage, Borrelia, Babesia, mycoplasma mold in these shots. So let's just accelerate the immune dysfunction by totally crippling it in one shot. This is the kill switch for those they injured. And yes, as Stephanie said, the kids that are higher vaccinated, they're ticking time bombs. They've got all this right there in their healthy immune system. So let's just put them in masks, isolate them, and then go ahead and inject them with that time bomb and accelerate their aging and death and blame it on whatever.
Okay. All right. So thank you for sharing all the information about the current vaccines. Now we want to add some hope and enlightenment and encourage people. We've got the population divided into essentially two groups, pretty much equal, but clearly it appears the majority have been vaccinated. So there's two strategies. One's for those who have been vaccinated, and second for those who haven't been and are exposed to people who have been, which is going to be virtually impossible to do. You're not going to be able to avoid them because it's the majority of people out there. So what can we do? From my perspective, one of the most important things to do is build up your innate immune system. So become metabolically flexible and optimize your diet. Use time-restricted eating to move yourself to eating within a 6 to 8 hour window. Avoid all vegetable oils. Avoid processed foods. Make sure your vitamin D level is optimized. These are all things that can upregulate your innate immune system so that you don't, which is every bit, if not more important, as your adaptive immune system, the ability to create antibodies, which these vaccines purport to do. So, but what do we do against the toxicity? In Stephanie's paper, she discusses the strategy of optimizing autophagy to digest and remove these spike proteins. So I'm wondering if you can comment on that, because I think it's a really vital or important approach if it works. And you can do that by fasting, by using time-restricted eating, and also by using exposure to a sauna, a high temperature sauna can all activate autophagy. So, and then I want your opinion on that, and then other items that we can do to protect those who haven't been vaccinated and those who are exposed to this so-called shedding from people who've been vaccinated.
Well, I'm really big on sulfur. And so eating a lot of sulfur-containing foods is important. And I think eating a lot of herbs and spices, because they have a lot of interesting molecules that will help to keep your mitochondria healthy. I think you need to keep your mitochondria healthy, and you need to keep your liposomes healthy. The organelles that digest food inside your cell, both of them, the mitochondria and the lysosomes, are really important for mitochondrial health and for the ability to clear debris, cellular debris, which includes these spike proteins, for example. You need to be able to break these things down. And the sauna is good, that the keeping your food in a narrow time window, eating absolutely only certified organic. When you go shopping at the grocery store, look for that certified organic label. Non-GMO is not enough. You need to minimize your glyphosate exposure. You need to stay away from cities and highways, because I think there's glyphosate in the air in those places. And in fact, a study in Brazil showed that there was higher levels of glyphosate in the nanoparticles in the air in the city compared to the nanoparticles in the air in the areas where they were growing foods using glyphosate. So in other words, it's concentrating in the cities. And I think that's because they're putting the glyphosate into the biofuels. Brazil is very big on bioethanol. And I think that the glyphosate is getting into the air on the highways in the cities. And I think that's a contributor to COVID-19, because the glyphosate is disrupting the lungs immune system. And that's what's critical. The innate immune system in the lungs is absolutely critical for being able to keep that virus at bay. Sulfur and sulfur-containing foods, certified organic foods, and sunlight. Sunlight is a big part of what I push for. I also like Epsom salt baths. And you say the hot use of water is hot as I love to take a really, really hot bath with Epsom salts. And I think that is a very effective program for helping to get sulfate in particular into your system.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And then Judy, your take on.
Yeah, fabulous. Everything she said, I agree with completely. Interesting, we just drove back from Yuba City. I'm in Ventura. That's a 7-hour drive through the Dust Bowl. So, that's that alveolar macrophage, as Stephanie just said, in the lungs. So everything both of you said is correct. And that's and I'm going to add the one thing that that probably in this world only I can say is never get another shot. Never get, because every shot, we knew the flu shot would drive the disease. It's the combinations with, the flu shots, most old people get them and they're like, oh, I'm fine. Now you have to think that that's a ticking time bomb sitting there in every cell. I think so never get another vaccine. Yes, as Stephanie and you just said, go in all of your medicine. Be very careful about what drugs you're taking that compromise your immune system. Enhance your immune system. For instance, if you have to take blood pressure medicine, and I'm not a practicing physician, I'm just saying what I do in my own home. My husband has COPD. That means by definition, he has he's not functioning with his alveolar macrophages are choked out. So he takes a budesonide inhaler, which we all know works in this disease. And we do everything we just said, but he cannot get another shot, because when I first met him, he had this COPD from a bacterial lung infection, and his doctor would say, "Oh yeah, you have to get Prevnar because you're more susceptible to lung disease." No, the answer is don't hyperimmune activate, don't eat GMO, don't ingest it, and don't inject it. and on your skin. Don't put it on your skin. Don't use toxic hair. That's your immune system. Use essential oils, use tea tree oils, use antimicrobials. I just attended the ozone therapy meeting. Dr. Sherry Tenpenny and I got back from Dallas a week or so ago, and we're adding the immune system, ozonated balms and creams, cannabis balms and creams. Normalize that skin that is your immune system. Sunlight, everything. I tell everybody, we know how to fix this. AIDS is not HIV. It was in the 80s. In the 80s, HIV caused AIDS. Now it doesn't, because we keep the immune system, keep the immune suppression, for people, steroids and natural products. So at every level, we can fix this. So as you mentioned, autophagy, yes. It's a metabolic process where starvation, because, you gobble up all that synthetic stuff and the sick cells. So you help your natural killer cells only gobble up sick cells and virus infected cells and cancer cells. Well, the vaccine is going to look like a virus infecting your cells, because that's that signal, the poly-IC. All you need is that signal in the RNA. So again, you can induce in autophagy, strengthen your natural killer cell component with everything we've said here, and only eat certain times. I do the intermittent fasting, so I came home with my XMRV infections on fire, my inflammatory pathways, because I was taking in all that dust driving through the farm fields from Ventura to Yuba City. So this morning I could hardly stop coughing before I got on this, because I already have the lung disease, because, it goes all the way back to our books. We know that Tony Fauci infected all the lab workers, contagious cancer, contagious Ebola, contagious HIV and XMRVs. So there you go. We know how to fix it. We cured AIDS. The hope is we've already solved this. Stephanie, we've been looking at these patients for the last 15 years, in my case. In your case is a lot longer. So we know antidotes, quercetin, luteolin, silymarin, type 1 interferons. We can get those in nasal sprays. We can get, enhance our antioxidants.
Hold on there, because that's sort of your specialty, since you've been studying it for so long. And I'm wondering, you're talking about the gamma interferon type 1. So what is the dose? Where do you get it? And at what? What is
I'm
the
talking alpha interferon.
Oh, you're coming out with one soon?
I said I'm talking alpha type.
Oh, alpha. I'm sorry. Alpha
type
interferon.
1. Gamma is the other. Yeah.
Okay, so the type 1 alpha interferon. When is it appropriate to use in someone who's been vaccinated, or is it only when they're having symptoms? If they're asymptomatic, it's not necessary. Or what would your recommendation be?
Oh no. Well, strengthening your type 1 interferon pathways, you can do that with cannabinoids. You can do it with a nasal spray if you already have defects, if you already have an ongoing infection, like say a temperature of 99. If you have COPD like me, where the definition of my pleurisy is you activate, that endogenous virome, you activate latent viruses, in my case, the XMRVs. I don't